Welcome back, class. Let's talk about fluids and using Bifrost. So a couple of things first, we need to actually set up our scene to make sure it functions correctly once we start setting up liquid simulations. So we're going to go into Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Plugin Manager. Now, if you don't already have Bifrost loaded, this is how we go about that. We get into this plugin manager, scroll down here to find Bifrost plugin, make sure that everything's set to loaded and auto load. And then there's one thing that I want you to enable as well for this exercise. You're going to find bullet bundle and click on loaded and auto load and close out of that. Now, another thing, we're going to go to Bifrost fluids, which you should see at the top now, as well as bullet, and make sure you're in the FX drop down menu. Bifrost fluids, let's turn on this display. This will show us the Bifrost particles, voxels, and steps, which we'll be getting into. Back into Bifrost fluids, let's scroll down to Bifrost options. One thing to keep in mind is you can up your RAM usage if your computer allows. So I'm trying a little bit of a higher number here myself. Apply and close. Another thing to note, if we go into Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Preferences, go into Settings. Now, the working unit is set to centimeter. Bifrost basically ignores these working units and it works in meters. So, but just something to note here as we get into using Bifrost. Cancel out of that. Now, I'm going to just dive right into it by creating a sphere, just to show you how this works, right? I'll bring up the sphere, and then let's attach a liquid to it. So with the sphere selected, select liquid. Another thing really quickly here, let's come down to the animation preferences, click on that, and then let's set this to play every frame, and then click on save. All right, now let's see what's happening here. There is a Bifrost liquid. You'll see that in the outliner. You'll see actually quite a few nodes. There's also a Bifrost liquid mesh that is created from the sphere, from this simulation. And there are different settings that we'll need to jump into, such as the emitter props, the liquid properties themselves, which we'll see, and then the actual liquid Bifrost. So let's rewind, play it back. Let's see what's going on. It's a little weird, right? The water comes out, however, it falls down in this sphere, basically the shape of the actual mesh that's emitting this Bifrost. That's not what we want, so going to rewind that. Let's click on our emitter props and then go into the attribute editor under the emitter props tab, and then you'll see this continuous emission. Go ahead and enable that, rewind and play it back. So now the water is going to continuously emit from the sphere and will keep dropping and dropping and dropping. Still does not look the greatest, but we're on our way to actually seeing what this water will look like. Now, it's a little sparse, so we need to make it a little more dense. So I'm going to click on Bifrost Liquid Properties, come over here to the tab in the attribute editor. You'll see solver properties with the gravity magnitude of 9.8, like we're used to seeing already. And then y-axis is -1, so gravity pulls the water down. Now, right here, resolution, master voxel size. We are working in meters, so let's make that smaller. Let's do master voxel size of 0.1. Rewind, play that back. Oh, did not. There we go. And then I'm going to play that and see what happens. You'll see that the particles are more dense, and you'll see a little bit of a better water flow. All right. Obviously, it will be a little slow. There's a lot to compute there. Let me pause that for the moment. And then another thing to keep in mind, let's click on liquid, which you'll find under Bifrost Liquid 1. Come over here to liquid shape. You'll see the display bounding box. That is this wireframe that you're seeing. You don't have to watch that. You have the particles, and then you have the voxels. So let me select voxels and disable particles. Rewind and play that back. And that's just going to give you a visual of your water. All right, let me pause that. Kind of a lot going on here. I can leave it on voxels, or I can go back to particles because it does calculate a little bit faster than voxels. One thing that I want to point out, however, is that, right now we're just seeing the water come down, but let's see how it actually works when it hits the surface. Then you'll really see the true water effect of this simulation. So with that said, I'm going to just rewind that, create a plane, scale it out, bring that up and rotate it. I want the water to cascade down. That's probably good enough. All right, now if I were to just hit play right now, all those particles would just fall through the surface. So this particular plane needs to be some sort of a collider. The particles should collide along the surface and flow down. So to do that, I'm going to select my Bifrost Liquid 1, Command click on my plane, go to Bifrost Fluids, and then we're going to select Collider. All right, let's rewind and play that back. I'm going to keep it on particles for the time being because it is a little faster to compute. Now watch what happens. This is really cool. So as it hits the surface, this is really going to start acting more like the water that we're expecting it to look like. The water will continue to flow. And again, I'm previewing this as particles for the sake of this animation kind of moving along a little faster. But if this was voxels, or an actual rendering, which I'll show you in a bit, then that would look really cool. Let me pause that. I'm surprised my Mac is somewhat being cooperative today. All right, let me pause that. So here's the water. I think it's looking really nice. And again, by default, the Bifrost fluids do come already pretty well rounded right out the door. And let me check out what's going on here. Here's a little issue, and I'll show you how to fix that. See how some of the particles are flowing through the floor? That's not what we want. So what we do want to do is, let's go into our liquid properties. And there are a lot of nodes here to go through, so a lot of different attributes, little drop-down menus. Sometimes it can be a little hard to find what's going on here. So this transport, find this transport section. Minimum transport steps is 1, so we do want more steps. More steps means it calculates more of the surface it hits as the water cascades down. So yesterday when I was trying this out, I did 800 and it took forever. I'm going to try maybe about 400. Hopefully it doesn't slow me down too much. Rewind, and I'm going to play that back. Though it is slow, it's not as painful as going through 800 transport steps. I just want to see what happens when the water hits the surface. Then I'll pause and then we'll check out how that looks from the side again. Give it just a moment. All right, as the water is hitting the surface, I'll just wait for it to come down here just a little bit more. And then I don't need to preview too much because at this point I should see if the transport steps helped in not going through the surface. And just pause that. That's good enough. And sometimes just pressing on that can take a little bit of time. And try to hit escape instead. All right. A little slow, you'll kind of see that action happening. All right, let's take a look at what's going on here. As you can see, the water cascades down the plane and does not fall through the surface. Now, maybe 400 steps was a little too much, so if needed, maybe I should have started with about, 100 to 200 just to see how that works. Obviously, the higher this number is, the slower this render of the simulation will be. So in this case, this is looking pretty good. And again, if you wanted to preview how this liquid looks in voxels, for example, minus particles, you can see a little better indication of what this will look like. Now, this also, I should point out, here's the liquid mesh. The liquid mesh already comes with a AI standard surface. So out the door, again, this surface is meant to look like water. Now, obviously, you can make adjustments to this, but you really, again, it's nice because Bifrost just really looks pretty dang good right out the door. So in this case, go ahead and save this if you'd like. I'm going to save it. Let's see, I'm not using any textures for this, so and this is just my little exercise. So I'll just give this a name. I'll just do Bifrost V1. We'll do a save, continue, and then we're going to move on to to the next part. Okay, for this next scene where we're going to actually fill a surface with a fluid and then drop an object into it, we're going to build this little scene together. So let's start with the cube. I'm going to scale this out, bring the scale down. Okay, from there I'm going to select my faces, shift, double click, extrude that out. Shift, double click, extrude that up. So this is going to be my little container. So this will be the, I'll just call it actually container. I'm going to delete the history and then create another cube. Scale this out. This will be actually the water. Just fill that a little bit better. Let's see what's going on here. All right. I don't need it to really touch the sides of everything here, so this is probably good enough. Maybe just a little bit more to fill that surface. Okay, so this will be the water mesh. All right, continuing on, we need a sphere. This is what's actually going to drop into the container. And then from here, we're going to actually use that bullet simulation. So getting into what we're going to be covering this week with animation and simulations. In animations, you have your traditional keyframing, and then you have your active and rigid bodies. So we're going to select the sphere, go under bullet, and then choose active rigid body. All right, I think I'm just going to ignore that message down there. And then when I hit play, sure enough, the sphere just kind of drops down and continues to fall. I'm going to click on my animation preferences, and instead of play every frame, I'm going to do 24 frames per second. Save that. So now as I hit play, the sphere, you'll notice, will continue to fall indefinitely because there's the bullet solver, and it does use a gravity, which we don't, we want the gravity, but we want it to stop on this container. So what we're going to do is select the container. Our container is going to be a passive body, so go under bullet and choose passive rigid body. All right, so now when the ball falls, it looks a little weird, right? Because it's not, here, let me move my water mesh, because the ball actually just sort of floats right here. It doesn't actually touch the bottom of the container, which is not accurate. So we need to adjust some settings in order for this ball to fall on the surface and actually, move around. So I'm going to select the container, go into the attribute editor, and go under bullet rigid body shape. This is a static body. It will just, we don't need this to be active. Scrolling down here, collider properties. Find the collider properties tab, open that up. And while this looks like a box, it really isn't because we have this cutout opening. So from box, we're going to switch this to mesh, static only. That should work a little better. And I will hit play just to show you that there probably won't be much of a difference until we change the collider shape margin. Not too bad. It's having some bounce, but it's not necessarily touching the floor. Let me see where that landed. All right, so it's almost there. Let me change this collider shape margin to about a 0.01. Let's see what happens when this falls. All right, not too bad. Let me click off auto fit. See what happens there. Zero this out. All right, not too bad. Maybe about a 0.2. Let's try that. All right, so it kind of has a nice little bounce to it. And then this sphere itself also has properties. So let me just name this. This will be our animated sphere. The collider shape type is set to box, which really isn't accurate. I'm actually going to set it to hull instead of sphere. And then perhaps lower this value as well. I liked it when it had a little more bounce, so let's see. Just want to get it to look kind of nice here. Scroll up. In this rigid body properties, we do have friction and restitution. This is another thing that we can try to change the settings and see how it works out for us. So here it is. I actually kind of like that it's traveling because we're going to see it travel through the water. It looks a little weird that it just keeps rolling, but maybe let me just up that a little bit. I kind of want to keep the roll because I want you guys to see what happens as it moves through the water. That's fine. I'll just leave it at that. So I'll just give it a little bit of friction, or lower the friction, I should say. There is, let me see here, in combination with restitution. That's probably fine. That's good enough. So in this case, I'm going to take this water, I'm going to bring that down. And now we are ready for the next, here we go, the next steps. In this next part, we're going to start adding fluid simulations to this animation. We already have a container, however, we need to make this into a fluid. So we're going to select our water mesh, go under Bifrost Fluids, and choose Liquid. You'll see the liquid particles here. So we're going to then take the water mesh. We don't need it anymore, we can hide it, so press H to hide that. Then you'll see the particles. We'll leave them as is for now. We just want to see how this water is going to look. And then as the ball drops, you'll see that the particles actually just disappear. So let me change my animation preferences, playback speed. Let me try play every frame, save. It's going to be slow, however, I can actually see my particles. Again, the issue is this is not a collider, so we need to fix that. In this case, however, both of our container and the animated sphere are going to be colliders as they need to react with the Bifrost. So I'm going to select my Bifrost Liquid 1 and then select my container, go under Bifrost Fluids and then choose Collider. Select Bifrost Liquid again, and then choose the animated sphere. Once again, Bifrost Fluids, this will be a collider. Now, let's see how this works. And again, this isn't that dense. I don't have enough particles, but I really just want to preview the simulation and how it looks. So let's see what happens when the sphere touches the ground. You'll see the water kind of move around and separate. Not bad. Let's go back and then we'll go into the attribute editor and then back into our Let's go under liquid properties, change the master voxel size again to 0.1. Let's see how that works out. Again, it's going to be a little more dense, but that's fine. Press play. This is going to be a little slow, so actually, for the sake of time, I'm going to stop this and then go back to maybe a 0.3. Rewind and play that back. It's a little more bearable. Again, it's like watching paint dry at this point, but I just want to see how it looks as the sphere touches the surface. And we don't have voxels enabled right now, we're just previewing the particles, but here you can get a little bit more of an idea of how this water moves around. So it's a nice little result as the sphere touches the surface. I didn't have enough bounce, so let me try it with 24 frames per second, although my particles may disappear. I don't know why that happens, so play every frame will do. All right, now in this case, let me check out, let me go into my liquid 1, turn on voxels. This will be a little slow, but I really want to see what happens when the sphere touches the surface. And I'll let this play out. All right, so here's my fluid. The ball kind of sinks. It is going to move the water around, and as it's moving through the surface, you'll see some water, a little bit of a splash there. Maybe if I had a bigger sphere, then we'd actually be able to see a little bit more of a result. So we're going to continue to keep working with this, see what else we can do as far as rendering and actually seeing our fluid. And then right now, let me try to grab my sphere and then increase the size of it, because I kind of want to see it move through the surface a little bit better. Let me see if I can just hit play here. Again, it's a little slow, but I don't want it to completely drown in the water. I want to see the water react around the sphere. I'm just kind of watching it just to see what it does here. I was hoping for a little bit more of a splash, but I do see the water actually reacting with the sphere as the sphere moves through it. Another kind of cool thing that I'm seeing happening right now is the water is going to spill out. So kind of an unintended effect, but I like it. Let's pause that. All right, so I made the sphere a little bigger. It drops down. Obviously, it's going to displace the water more, so that's kind of, again, unintended result, but we'll stick with that. And then just to see how this looks, because we do have, essentially we do have a shader attached to this, and we can see how this looks in a render. We do need to add some lighting to this. So let me see here. I'm not seeing, let me switch back to my modeling here. Here's Arnold. Here's Arnold. Let's go to lights. I'll choose Sky Dome Light. And then before I tweak any other settings, let me just see what's going on in the scene here. May take a moment. All right, so I can see the water here spilling out. Look at this essentially you have your refractions here as well. And then I think I want to capture this sphere as it hits the surface, just so you can see the ripples. So let's wait for this sphere to hit the surface. If I make it smaller, I may get a little more of a splash, but for now, let me just see what happens with this. So one thing I'm actually going to do is cache this that way I can kind of slide back and forth on the timeline to preview my animation. I am going to bring down the size of the sphere. I do want to see it a little bit smaller. And then let me see what happens as it falls down. It's going to be slow, but just really want to get a nice little splash out of this water. So kind of a little bit of a splash here. I do want to render that just to see. And for the sake of continuing this exercise, as you can see, you can keep playing with the settings to get a nice little splash going. I can mess with the mass of the ball and then some of the settings within the bullet solver. All right. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that here's some water actually splashing up. Let me rewind. Another thing we can do here is cache our animation so it makes it a little faster to actually preview what all is going on. Another thing is I can preview this mesh a little differently. So if I scroll down here to Liquid 1, scroll down here in the Liquid Shape tab, down at the bottom you'll find Bifrost Meshing. Open that up and click Enable. This may take just a moment here to calculate. And then you should see a better representation of your mesh. In this case, I'll disable voxels. So here's my mesh. Just a little better representation of what the water looks like. And then you'll see, because sometimes, having voxels and or particles enabled makes it a little difficult to really see the effect of the animation. So this is where we can test out the actual mesh enabled to see what that looks like. So here's the ball hitting the surface. You can kind of preview, again, the transparency and the splash results of this animation. And then another thing we can do here is, and I'm actually going to increase the size of the sphere a little bit more. Another thing I want to add is foam. So if I select my Liquid 1 node here, go back under Effects, go to Bifrost Fluids and choose Foam. All right, and now, well, before I let this get out of control, let me go back to Liquid 1. Let me disable that and turn on maybe just particles back on. That's going to be a little better. I don't want to see Bifrost meshing on this. I think it's just going to mess up the overall view. We can always preview the foam as we go to render. So I'll get the sphere to come down. All right, let me just pause it right there and then do a test render. It's a little light, but you do see some of the foam being added to the rim of the splash. Now, another cool thing to try would be to take this sphere and actually keyframe it moving through the water. And then as you play your animation or do a test render, you'll see that the ripples will actually follow through.